If you're recording voiceover, you might be on the hunt for a good hardware preamp and processor to polish your recordings. Now, when a mic preamp includes processors like compression, EQ, a de-esser, and an expander gate, they're referred to as channel strips. Now, I'm going to walk you through how I set this ART voice channel for great sounding voiceovers. But what makes this video a little different is that I'm not going to just tell you what the controls do. I'm going to tell you what to listen for when you're actually turning the knob so you can set this unit to sound great on your voice by setting it up yourself. All right, the first thing I want to do is we're going to set the preamp tube gain, but I want to kind of walk you through a couple things first. My condenser mic is using phantom power, so we've got that switched on. The input is going into the mic input in the back. It's cool that this one, this channel strip has the input for a line or mic in the front, but I'm using the one in the back. We've got the tube gain set at a particular level right now, and I'm going to come back to this. I just want to kind of walk you through a few things on the preamp section before we really talk about setting a level. There's a low cut or high pass filter that you can engage. I'm going to engage it right now so you can hear the difference. Right now we are cutting off, it's 100 hertz and below at a 12 decibel per octave slope. It's a type of a gentle slope. I'm going to keep it off because I want to be able to manipulate those low frequencies with the EQ a little later on. There's a pad switch, and that reduces the level by 20 dB. You'd use that if you were recording really loud sources with whatever mic you were using, like a kick drum, or maybe you're trying to capture a guitar cabinet for a bass or guitar. And if that source is really loud, you would peak at even the lowest gain setting sometimes, depends on the situation. So you can use a pad to try to bring the level back into a desirable range. And then there's an invert switch, and that is if we were recording, doing some stereo recording, and we needed to invert the polarity for one of the microphones to make sure it was in phase. We're not doing that when we're recording a single mono voice source. So I just wanted to walk you through what those buttons are. The impedance selector here is a variable selector, and the impedance or the resistance of the microphone that I'm using, my Mini K87 by Roswell Audio, is rated at 112. And so I'm setting the impedance here at 150, which is as close as we can get. Now, the impedance can be adjusted, and what it does is there's no right or wrong. It's a character adjustment. When you change the impedance on your preamp, it changes the tone and the character of the microphone. It also, in this case, is seeming to raise the level a little bit, but it changes sometimes the tone depending upon the microphone, and you can do that here. I'm going to keep it at the lowest setting so it's closer to the intended impedance for this microphone. I also want to draw your attention to the tube voltage. Now I'm going to switch it in right now. It was at normal. It was disengaged before. And the tube voltage switch, normal, is taking more advantage of the tube saturated sound. And when you switch it to a high voltage, it's a little bit of a cleaner sound. I just wanted to show you that you can change this. And the manual tells us it takes about 10 to 20 seconds to get to the intended sound once you engage the voltage switch here. So both the voltage that you can change and the impedance, those differences are quite gentle. They don't make a huge difference in sound, but they're there, and I wanted to explain what they can do. Now, I am going to, now that you can hear what the high voltage and the difference in those two sound, I'm going to switch it back to normal, because if you are reaching for the ART voice channel, tube channel strip with a tube preamp, you're probably looking to lean more towards the tube sound. Maybe you want a little bit of that tube saturation. That's why you would be choosing to use this particular type of preamp in the first place. So I want to take advantage of that. So with the tube voltage switch on the normal side, we're going to hear more of that tube saturation, which I'm going to illustrate for you. And a couple more things just before we set the gain I want to draw your attention to is this peak meter. We've got a VU meter here. The VU meter is an average level out. These are output meters. The VU meter is an average level. This works slower and gives us an average level. This digital meter is a peak meter, and it works much quicker. And this is very useful when setting an output level. And you can see the last thing we want to do is clip here, and green is a good level, yellow is getting close to clipping, and red will actually clip. We haven't clipped yet, and I don't want to clip. What I like to do to set a level is peak no higher than -6. And you can see some of the numbers here, -25, 20, 15, 10, and -5. I want to make sure I'm peaking just below that. My highest peak is going to be just below that -5, so it's around -6. And you'll see the green bars here are jumping, but there's one that stays illuminated for a second or two. It just actually is probably a little less than a second. That's called a peak hold line, and it's staying illuminated so it can show us where the latest peak was. And it's very useful when you're setting a level. So I could see my peaks are somewhere between 8, -8, -7. That was -6 right there. I don't want to peak any higher than -6. And this peak meter, because I'm using a line out of this unit, this peak meter is and should be very, very similar to the peak meter on the input track of my DAW that I'm recording to. So I'm going to use this really to help us set a level. And it's necessary to make sure when you start that this output level, this is another gain. So we've got a gain, the tube gain here, and we've got an output level here. I'm going to show you how from the very beginning to set it all, but I just wanted to show you this is an output gain level. This is clean gain. This is tube gain, and the ratio between the two gives you a particular sound. But to start, we're going to set this at 0. And to reiterate one more time, my microphone is going into the mic input in the back, and we're going out of this unit. It is a balanced line level out, and that's going to a line level input in one of the tracks, one of the channels in my audio interface, then to my DAW. All right, let's talk about setting the gain. The first thing I do when I'm setting the ART voice channel is I put my output on 0. I want to keep that at 0. This is the unity gain for the output. And then what I'll do is I'll start, a little bit lower. I'll keep my eye on the peak meter, and I'll raise this gain slowly to try to get my peaks, my loudest peaks, the loudest portions to about -6. I don't want to go over -6, but I want to get as loud as I can without peaking over -6. Peaking around -10, -12, -7 is pretty good. As long as you don't peak over -6, that allows you enough headroom and never gets you close to clipping. That's a good audio exposure. That's a good audio recording level. Now, I want to show you kind of the limits and the reasons why you would want to modify something different. Okay, this is a good level. This is where we'd start, and we're going to talk about some of the other processors. But I want you to understand that you would reach for a tube preamp to try to get some of that saturation, some of that tube preamp sound. And especially if you're tracking vocals, if you're tracking guitars and things, that tube saturation is something that is really desirable for studio producers. Yes, it could also be for voiceover, but I'm going to push it to the limit here just so you illustrate and show you what that difference is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn down the output level and increase the gain until I go way over, and you'll hear some of the distorted breakup, the saturation breakup. So I need to retain this level and my input level and my recording level. I need to turn this down when I raise the gain up. That's going to help us keep this level the same. Now it can be a little off and you fine tune it, but I just want you to show you what I'm doing. I'm raising the gain here so it's getting louder, and I'm going to lower the output so we're retaining, and you can start hearing some of that breakup. I'm going to raise the gain all the way, and now you can hear if I lower this so we don't peak over -6, my louder speech, it's beginning to break up, giving us that tube saturation. I want you to hear what this sounds like because this is the sound of tube saturation. It's kind of a softer distortion. It thickens things, and it also allows you to add harmonics. That breakup is adding harmonics to the signal. Now, would you use this distorted type of saturated sound for a voiceover? No, but I want you to see the limit. I want you to see what too much saturation sounds like. And maybe you've kind of done this a little bit with plugins. You push it too far, and this is the sound that you get. So now let's go completely the other way. I'm going to lower the gain a lot, the tube gain, and raise the output, the clean gain level. I'll raise that output even further. So this is the clean tube sound. So we have a palette to choose from. And the whole idea here is with a preamp. I mean, this is when you get an external preamp and you have an independent preamp, that is what's giving you those palettes. You've got the impedance to change the tone a little bit. You've got the gain. You've got the output level. And there's a ratio you want to find that does everything and gives you the tone and the sound that you want. In this case, we've got the voltage as well that you could add into this. But what I want you to see is the spectrum of tones that you can get with a preamp. It's pretty cool, and especially becomes important and it becomes noticeable when you start stacking instruments if you're recording and a producer is recording a bunch of different instruments or a series of vocal harmonies. When you use some saturation, it gives it a thickness and a wall of sound that you just can't get without having this tube saturation. And I also use the analogy of cranking up a gain is like when you turn up the distortion on a distorted channel on a Fender amp, a guitar amplifier, or a Marshall to get that distorted guitar sound. A lot of times it's done with an amplifier, a tube amp, to give it that thickness. Again, so this is the cleaner sound, but to be honest, I like to get it right kind of in the middle. We're taking advantage of the tube. We're not peaking over -6. It's a little bit high. 1, 2, 3, my loudest speech isn't peaking over -6. I'm taking advantage of some of that tube saturation. I'm using the output level at 0, which is giving us the proper level going out of this unit into my audio interface to give us a good level to record for voiceover. So it's kind of a happy medium. This is how I like to set it to take advantage of that tone, that warm tube sound, but not going overboard and breaking up. It's kind of the middle ground here, but I wanted to show you, I guess we went just over -6. So my loudest speech was, I don't want to do that. I'm backing off the gain a little bit. Just wanted to show you the spectrum that you have to work with when you are dealing with a tube preamp that allows you to dial in those ratios between the gain and the output level. All right, now we're going to talk about setting the compressor. We've got these 4 controls here: the threshold, ratio, attack and release, and the gain reduction meter. We'll talk about that. Those are the things that are going to make up the compressor. The threshold sets at what level does the compressor start working. The ratio tells us how much compression is going to be applied. And then the attack and release, the attack is how quickly, once the audio goes over the threshold, how fast is the compressor going to start working. And then once the audio goes back underneath the threshold, how fast the release is, how fast it's going to bring that level back up to the level it was before the compressor started working. Now, I'm going to show you what to listen for and how to set all these knobs, but I just wanted to give you just a little bit of a background. Now, the threshold is kind of, it's related to the gain, so it's going to take more threshold. It's going to take a lower threshold if we've got a lower gain setting. You'll notice it won't take as high of a threshold if we've got a higher gain setting. So let's bring the ratio setting up to 2.5 to 1. This is how much reduction, how much compression is going to be applied to the audio after it falls past the threshold. So you could look at it this way. It's a ratio. For every 2.5 decibels that go beyond the threshold, going into the compressor, it's going to come out 1 dB. So 2.5 into the compressor is going to come out 1. If we were to raise it to 8, that means for every 8 dB going into the compressor, it's going to come out 1. That's more compression. And you'll start seeing how much compression is being applied with the gain reduction meter. So this all happens with the threshold. So the first thing I do, we'll set the ratio to 2.5 to 1. I think that's probably a pretty good starting point for voiceover. It's going to give us a nice transparent type of a sound. We don't want to be too aggressive. And I'm going to push the compressor way beyond what it should be for voiceover, just so you can hear what that sounds like. But we'll do that towards the end. So set it to 2.5 to 1. I'm going to lower the threshold until I see I'm getting about 1 to 2 to 3, maybe a little bit more, 3 dB of reduction at my highest, most accentuated speech. So when I'm projecting more, my loudest parts of my words, you're seeing it's getting 3 dB of reduction. You can see the numbers, -1, -5, -10. That's how much reduction. It's kind of a backwards meter. It's showing us how much reduction, how much the level is being attenuated once it passes the threshold. It takes a little bit of time to get used to how it works and what it does, but I always suggest you play with the compressor. You can't break anything. Turn it too high, turn it too low, and kind of feel it out. But I'm going to show you what I'm listening for, though. So I set the compressor, the threshold on the compressor to get about 1 to 2 to 3 dB during the loudest speech. And that's kind of what that looks like. That's a good range. Now, when I move to the attack and release, that is a little bit more difficult to hear unless you know what to listen for. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, I should say one more thing. When we get a couple dB of reduction, that's actually lowering the output level a little bit by a couple dB at the loudest parts of the speech. So you could turn up the output to kind of get back to the level you were at before. So if I were to crank up how much compression and lower the threshold to where I'm getting way more compression, this is 10 dB of reduction, you'll notice that the output is lower because we're reducing the peaks, right? We're reducing the loudest portions of our audio. Then you could replenish that with the output gain to get us back to peaking around 6 dB in the output meter here. So what it's doing is the compressor at the loudest points is attenuating my speech, and then the output level is raising it back up. So really, basically what we're doing is we're shrinking the dynamic range, and that's what a compressor does. Now, this is probably too much compression. Let's push it even harder. I want to do this on purpose. 15 dB of reduction. So this is a really compressed signal. But what this does is when you push it, would you use this for voiceover? No. But what this does is it allows us to really hear the attack and release. So I'm going to open up the release so where it's really slow. Let's keep the attack here. Let's concentrate on the release. The release is how fast the compressor returns to the signal once my voice or once the material going into the compressor goes back under the threshold. And this is really slow. So I'm going to start speeding it up. I like to set the release time so it goes back to 0 just about towards the beginning of the next word, right? So when I'm speaking, it's reducing, and then it's going back to 0, getting all the way back to normal by the time I start the next word in my sentence. That's probably a pretty good, transparent, natural kind of a release setting. Now, it sounds pretty odd because we're compressing this pretty hard right now, but we're gonna reduce the amount of compression once we set the attack. But this helps us hear the release better. Same thing with the attack. If I were to open this up, you are going to hear the transients. You'll hear the T's and P's, the beginnings of my consonants and words. You're going to hear those come through better because the attack is set to slow, 100 milliseconds, and it's not attenuating those peaks because it's letting them come through. It's delaying when it hears the audio come through the threshold, and as soon as it hears it, it's waiting 100 milliseconds, and then it's reducing. So what you can do is speed up the attack to where it's grabbing the beginnings of those consonants. Listen to the T's, T's, T's. Slower attack time lets the crack of the T come through, and then it's reducing. But if I make the attack time faster, it's really grabbing those T's, so nothing is coming through. It's attenuating even the very beginnings and the very start of the consonants and T's and P sounds in my voice. So I like to set a bit of a faster attack time so it clamps down on the beginnings of those words for a voiceover because I want it to work kind of transparently. Now let's put it back. I'm going to have to lower the output volume. Let's put it back to 2.5 to 1. And so now we know that the attack and release time is set in the right place. Probably have to raise this up just a little bit to get us to peak at the right level. And then maybe we'll just fine-tune the threshold here just to take 1 to 2 dB, maybe 3 at the loudest speech of reduction. And now I think that is a pretty good, it's a pretty good compressor setting, a compression sound for my voiceover. It's very transparent, it's very natural, but it's reducing just the highest peaks. Then I'm replenishing that audio signal to bring the quieter parts to be a little louder. So now that we've set the compressor, we're going to talk about the de-esser section, and it's related because the de-esser is not independent of the compressor. It kind of is an extension of the compressor, and I'll explain what I mean. We're going to keep we'll keep the compressor on here, and the only way to shut it off is to turn it completely counterclockwise, the ratio, and then we put it back to 2.5 to 1. You can hear some of that top end, the highest, most strong or prevalent peaks of my voice are being attenuated. The de-esser is what the de-esser does. It's really a side chain into the compressor, and what the de-esser is saying on this unit is when you hear sibilant sounds in this particular frequency, I want them to trigger the compressor so it works a little harder. So really the de-esser is just it's an extra side chain going into the compressor. The compressor is going to work on all the frequencies, but I'm going to say, hey, at this particular frequency, and I'll show you how to find that frequency. At whatever frequency is offending, is too much sibilance, we're going to have the compressor work harder. So they're kind of connected in this particular unit. What I like to do is turn up the de-esser amount, so we can hear, and then I'll cycle through and I want to find the frequencies that are most offending on my voice. And I happen to know that mine is about 5 or 6, it's around here. And what you can do is you'll see, now that I've got the de-esser activated, you could see that it's the compressor is working harder. And I'll explain that. So, but to find the frequency that I want, I'll usually say my S's and SH sounds, sh and s, and you could cycle through and see where you can see where the compressor is working the hardest. How much is the most attenuation? Where is the most attenuation happening at what frequency? And I'd say just what I suspected with my voice, about 4 to 5 to 6 K in that frequency space is where my sibilance is. And for today, I'll set this because that's where my sibilance is on this microphone in this room, using this setting. And then we can dial this back again. Here's no de-esser at that frequency. And then we're raising, what you're basically doing is raising the side chain to trigger the S section of the compressor, the high frequencies, that frequency of the compressor when it happens. So basically the de-esser is telling the compressor to work harder when it hears that frequency. Also at this point, because the compressor is related here and it's working differently, I'll go ahead again and fine tune my output, which is probably still about the same, but I'm always keeping an eye on this output level to make sure that I'm peaking no higher than -6. That's going to give me a good level for the gain staging here between the gain and the output going into my DAW. Okay, let's look at the expander gate of this unit. So we've got the gain setting, we've got the compressor and de-esser. We're going to keep those on. The expander gate is basically a door that opens and closes. When it hears my voice, it opens it up, and when I don't have any audio material going through the preamp, and it hears a signal at a particular threshold. If it's above the threshold, it opens. If it's below the threshold, it closes. And there's two ways you can do this. The gate is more of an abrupt. It's either open or close. Open all the way, closed all the way. And I'm going to, I'll turn up the threshold here so you're going to hear it's set on gate right now, and you're going to hear it opening and closing. And you can see the gate closes, and this yellow LED illuminates when the gate is closed. And it's abrupt. You can kind of hear it clicking a little bit and cutting off the ends or the beginning of some of my words. And then the higher I set it, the more you can hear it turning on and off. And so it's probably, here, I'll turn it off again. It's probably not the best for voice. That's why it's cool to have an expander. The expander opens and closes more gently, and it's a ratio. It's not like open and then close, one or the other. It opens and closes, and it has more of a natural sound. So you can hear the difference now. You don't hear that click. Still, it illuminates when the expander or when that door closes, but it's definitely more natural and you don't hear it turning on and off. So that's why you'd want to use the expander. So now that it's set on the expander side and you can hear the difference of both of those, I'm going to turn it off and I'll show you what I listen for when I set an expander or the expander on this particular unit. You may have to turn the volume up a little bit on your monitors or your headphones or whatever so you can hear this. But right now, there's definitely some noise in my room. In the studio, I've got a light on. There's a fan on the light fixture, the video light, and then also just noise that's happening in my room, outside my room, and cars going by, and helicopters and jets or whatever. You can definitely hear that. And if you're quiet and you turn it up, the volume on your end, you can hear that noise. And what I like to do is I hear that noise in my headphones when I'm setting this, and I like to turn the expander until that noise goes away, and we'll know that's active when that LED lights up. And then I'll usually go a little bit more. Then I'll fine-tune it by speaking and making sure it sounds natural. So let's try that right now. You may want to turn up the speakers so you can hear the noise, and you can hear when it shuts off. Here we go. It's a big difference, right? That's no noise. The gate is closed. I shouldn't say gate. The expander is closed. And now it's open. You can hear the noise come through. But that's a pretty natural. Now, if we do it too much on the expander, it'll still chop off some of the words. We don't want that. So to get a pretty natural sound for this setting of the gain and the output volume and the compressor and everything, it's right about in the middle somewhere. I think that it rids the audio of some of that background noise without being too apparent and without being too noticeable. I want it to be natural on this particular setting. All right, next on the list is the EQ, and I'm going to walk you through how I set this EQ to get a good voiceover sound for the ART voice channel. Okay, let me walk you through some of the controls here on the EQ. We've got a low shelf. You can center the curve at 50 hertz or 150 hertz. And the high end, we've got a high shelf, and you can center that at 5 kilohertz or 15 kilohertz, and that 15 is the air. So we've got two shelves, and we've got two semi-parametric mid bands. So what you can do here is you can select the lower mid frequency, or you can select the higher mid frequency. You can use them both. And then you can decide if you want to increase or attenuate that frequency. Now, the reason why it's a semi-parametric is because you can't modify the sharpness of the bell. The bell curve, you can't adjust the width of that bell. It's a set curve, but you can adjust the frequencies, and you can also adjust how much you're increasing or decreasing that frequency of those two mid bands. There's the EQ position switch. That means you can place this EQ before the compressor or after the compressor. Personally, when I'm working with a voiceover type of sound, I like to put the EQ before the compressor, and so we would switch that in here, and now any of the changes we make are going to happen, and then the compressor is going to be working. It's going to be compressing the EQ'd signal versus just adding the EQ after the compressed signal. Two different sounds that it offers you. I prefer to do this particular way, and I'll put it before and after so you can hear the difference. But so what we're going to do is we're going to do the EQ before the compressor, and really what happens is, if you increase the bass, I have to engage it. If you increase the bass quite a bit, you'll see that because the EQ is placed before the compressor, this extra energy that we're adding with the bass or some of the mid frequencies are going to make the compressor work harder. So you may need to go back and adjust the threshold. That's just one of the things by putting an EQ before the compressor. But here's what I like to do to set the EQ for my voice to get a nice broadcast type of sound or a natural type of voiceover sound in real time with the ART voice channel. The first thing I'm going to do is find a little bit of mud, maybe where I can clear out some of the low, mid, or lower frequencies. And what I like to do is crank it up. I'm going to choose the lower mid-range band. I'm going to turn it up so I can hear what that band is and cycle through. If I raise it up, you can hear it's 1K, 2K, 3K. But if I want to go and find where that mud is, where's that mud? well, maybe right around here, 1, 2, 3 in my voice, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, that mud around 200, 250. And so now I'll bring it back to 0. And now if I just attenuate 3 dB maybe, you can hear it's bringing a clarity to that lower mid area. It's not so muddy, it's not so thick, but what I can do is bump up the lows just a little bit to keep some of that warmth in there, yet I still have the clarity. That's the way I kind of like to do it. Let's see, if we try the 50 hertz, the really low, we can get some of that really low bass, maybe raise this up a little bit. That's one particular style that you can hear. I think it sounds a little bit more natural if we lower the mid that we're attenuating and maybe just bump this up just a touch. To me, that sounds a little more natural. I like the way that sounds in my voice. All right, let's look at the upper mid-range. I'm going to crank this up just like I did for the last one, and then sweep these frequencies. And I want like an upper mid clarity frequency I could find that really kind of helps the voice kind of poke through. I think that's a nice 1, 2, 3, that area right there. I feel like without it, it's a little empty. There's a little valley that I'm hearing in that frequency. So if I maybe add 3, 4 dB in that mid-range area, it allows for even more clarity. And to be honest, I feel like it doesn't really need much of the highs, but let's just give it a little bit of the air up on top there. And, that's kind of how I approach setting an EQ here. It may be a little much, but that's how I set the EQ here. I want you to hear the difference. So I may be pushing it just a touch much from what I'm hearing now. And really the best way to know how far you've gone when you're making adjustments like this is to, they call it A/B testing. You want to compare it to the original signal. So let's take the EQ out. This is what the voice sounds like without the EQ. It's bypassed, and now the EQ is active. Here, a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit less mud, a little more clarity. We're not losing any of the lows, and we're adding a little bit of highs. Not much work going on here with the EQ. And now let's put the EQ post-compressor. So let's see, now it's afterwards, and here the EQ is bypassed, and so that's what it sounds like, bypassing the EQ, and now we've engaged the EQ, and it is post after the compressor, and that's what that sounds like. I like putting it before the compressor, and then maybe we'll back off just a touch, so the compressor is not working too hard with some of this extra low material, but it's still doing what it does. Then we can look again at the output level and modify this to make sure we're getting a good level on the peak meter here, leaving the ART voice channel. And that's kind of how I go about setting it to get a good voiceover sound. Now, I think one of the last things I'd like to do here is really show you the before and after with all of these processors. Obviously, we're going to hear what we hear with the tube gain, but I want to disengage the compressor, de-esser, expander gate, and EQ all at once, and then engage it again so you can hear the grand difference that this processor is making. So one thing I wish this unit had was one button to disengage all of the processing. You kind of have to do a few different things to change, 3 really. You have to do 3 different things to remove all the effects. And, then they may be a little off to what you had before. So what I'm going to do is take off the expander. I'm going to bypass the EQ, and I'll turn the ratio down, which will shut off the compressor and the de-esser at the same time. So I'll try to recreate those exact settings, but this is what it sounds like without any of the processing engaged. And this is what it sounds like with the processing engaged. So we'll do that one more time here. Here is with the processing engaged, without the processing engaged on this ART voice channel strip. And finally, one more time with the processing engaged. So I'll share my thoughts on when to use a channel strip like this one versus using plugins to process your voiceover. I prefer plug-in processing if I need the absolute best quality from the recording. But if you need a processed voice recording sound in a live situation, like for streaming. Let's say you're streaming live on YouTube or you're doing video calls live. You can use a channel strip like this, and it could be a good choice. When it comes to VoiceOver, I don't use a channel strip and post-processing with plugins simultaneously. I'll use one or the other. You could see my other hardware channel strip walkthrough videos for VoiceOver on some of the other channel strips, like the DBX 286S, possibly one of the most popular radio broadcasting channel strips. The Symmetrix 528E, it's now out of production, but you could still find it in studios today. The Behringer UV1, which is an affordable channel strip that rivals the DBX and includes a few more features, and the Avalon 737, possibly one of the most famous channel strips used on countless hit records. I'll put the links to those in the description of this video. I have free tips and techniques available on my website. The Voice Recording Basics training course is a great place to start if you're a beginner. And then you can find training courses on the fundamentals of EQ for VoiceOver, VoiceOver production workflow, acoustic treatment for VoiceOver, the optimal recording level for VoiceOver, marketing, and more, so you can have your voice sound better and have the greatest impact on your audience. Go to lennyb.com for all the details. Thanks for watching.